Hello and welcome to the August 14th edition of Ukraine Without Hype. I am Anthony Bardaway.
And I'm Romy Kukratsky.
So throughout the course of this episode, you might hear some background noise coming from my end if I can't edit it out, because I'm currently lacking some sound insulation. My windows, most of them, were all blown out in a missile attack last week. Now, the weird thing about this particular missile attack, and we'll get into it at the end of this segment, is that it was a interception rather than a direct hit on anything. And it was the lone interception of that night. But the thing was that it hit basically on the other side of the street corner from me in front of my grocery store. Thankfully, as it turned out, nothing was permanently damaged. Pretty much every window on my building was destroyed. Thankfully, I am a west-facing apartment. All the south-facing apartments that were facing the explosion itself went through a lot more damage. My neighbor had the wall between their living room and the balcony just completely buckled in. That's all destroyed. That needs to be repaired. Thankfully, I just need to replace the windows. And there's lots of thankfullys in there. Thankfully, I was not facing the explosion directly, but rather at a bit of a diagonal. And thankfully, I was not in my living room at the time. This happened at 2 a.m. Typically, I would be in my living room on the computer still, which would have been directly in front of the balcony windows, and that would likely have resulted in injury. But rather, I was on the north side of the apartment, which meant that I was more or less unaffected, other than the earth-shattering kaboom and everything shaking and the terror of everything. As you may tell from the way I'm talking about this, I was still a bit affected by it. I've been, nearly blown up a handful of times, including a few of them where they're directly trying to blow me up specifically, and I've usually not been so affected by it. This time, though, a little bit more. I'll get over it eventually, as much as anyone can be. Thankfully, it was only my balcony windows that were shattered, meaning that I can still close off the inside of my living room to the outside world, so it's not completely exposed to the elements. Thankfully, this occurred in August rather than December, meaning that I'm not going to freeze to death, and in some cases this winter, literally, that happened. And overall, pretty lucky, including, thankfully, that it was an interception rather than a direct hit. So, last episode, we had Romeo's neighborhood going through a pretty serious attack, and this time around, we have me. Everyone gets their turn, I suppose.
Yep, such is the realities of war, unfortunately.
So, when this attack happened and heard all the shattering, I was able to go outside for a little bit. Not something I typically do, but I just needed to not be inside anymore at that point. And about an hour later, there was a drone incoming, and it was a attempt at a double tap, where they will send a drone or another missile at a site that they had already attacked to kill any first responders or anyone else who might have been there at the time, people who had left the building and just kind of milling about as I was. These double tap attacks have been increasingly common, including on that night. There was another double tap. Well, I think there were several double tap attacks that very night. One of them killed a first responder, Ava Reuter, as well as her protege, Vitalina Yorovenko. The LGBTQ plus military union put out announcement on the death of Ava. I'll read it here now. On the night of the 1st of August, during a Russian attack on Kiev, a member of our community lost her life. Ava Reuter, a paramedic with the Volunteer Medical Battalion, the Hospitalers, whose code name was Planochka, and was also known as Alice. Ava had gone to the site of the strike to help the wounded. The medical team she was part of was hit by another Russian strike. Ava lost her life whilst saving others, said Yana Zinkevich, commander of the Hospitalers. Ava was only 25 years old. Before the war, Ava was an artist and an art historian. She worked in video game development. In June 2022, she defended her bachelor's thesis at the National Academy of Fine Arts and Architecture, then joined the Hospitalers in November of 2022. She evacuated the wounded, helped supply the medical forces, and took part in the campaign, quote, "Different Veterans Won Victory." Ava was an openly bisexual woman and spoke out in favor of equality, women's rights, and women's place in the armed forces. Our condolences go to her family, loved ones, and Ava's brothers and sisters in arms. Vitalina Yarovenko was younger than her, a student who had organized medical trainings in her university, getting more into the medical side of supporting the armed forces, and in this case, civilians who were affected by missile strikes. Once again, truly two of our best, taken in the prime of their lives because Russia is demonically evil. Other attacks included a police officer. There was people at a train station near Brovary. I believe that killed 8 people at that train station. There's another video of a woman trying to get to a shelter and being killed in the attempt. And really, it's been a very bad month thus far. And the reason for that is there's no more Patriot missiles.
Yeah, there are no more Patriot missiles. It turns out that while there are a lot of technically extant ballistic missile interception systems in the world, there is only one system, a singular system, that has anything approaching a usable interception success rate, and that is the United States Patriot missile system. Because there's only one system and only one nation who licenses out the creation of Patriots, the U.S. isn't the only place that builds Patriots. I believe Japan can also build Patriots, but obviously the majority of production is done in the U.S., and the majority of output is earmarked for the U.S. military needs. So since 2023, when Ukraine actually received our first Patriot batteries, we've been begging, borrowing, not quite stealing, but definitely begging and borrowing every single Patriot missile we can come across. They have been marvelously successful in their operations so far. Patriots are, quite frankly, the reason that Kyiv is still habitable, in my opinion, because the Russians, as you see, keep shooting us. When we don't have interceptor missiles to shoot Russian ballistics out of the sky, those missiles will strike their targets. And as we've seen, causing widespread devastation. I believe there was a UN report that indicated that this month specifically has been, or rather this previous month, July, that July has been the deadliest month for civilians in Ukraine. And this is wholly due to a lack of air defense. And the reason, there's a couple of reasons for why. First off is they were never especially a widespread stock thing outside of the US in the first place. While European partners do have their own Patriot systems, a good portion of them have given those Patriots to us along with all of the missile stockpiles. And once those stockpiles are done, you have to order more. The manufacturing timeline for a single Patriot missile, if I remember correctly offhand, is something on the line of 16 to 18 months. That is almost 2 years to produce one interceptor. So any orders, for example, that we got those missiles in April 23, we shot them off. Let's say we shot off, I don't know, Belgium's missiles. While Belgium puts an order in for more Patriot interceptors, we're not going to get those at least until basically 2025, 2026. And that is when the United States, the main manufacturer and purchaser of these interceptor missiles, isn't taking its place in the queue. The way it works is that the majority of the production lines are kind of reserved for U.S. orders. That is, if the U.S. military puts in an order, it will take precedence over other countries' orders and requests, because that's how that's how it
It's
works.
their stuff.
When you're
It's their stuff. They're going to take care of their own needs first.
Exactly. So, and now, mind you, in most cases, this is fine because the U.S. is very rarely in a conflict that requires the mass use of Patriot interception missiles. It's been a very rare thing. But then American President Donald J. Trump decided to assassinate the top political leadership of Iran and then begin bombing their country in a war, which is still ongoing, which has not been authorized by Congress, which is a massive violation of a whole bunch of constitutional legal principles that no one cares about. Anyway, the point is, going into a war with Iran, mind you, a militarily capable nation who has been involved in the conflict here in Ukraine since 2022, since they have been supplying Russia with Shaheeds and were supplying Russia with Shaheeds prior to the conflict and have been ever since. The US military found itself using a whole bunch of Patriot interceptor missiles. In fact, according to some reports indicating most of the stock, at least 75% of it. All of this adds up to,
I've seen anywhere between half and 2/3 of the American Patriot supply is
yeah.
gone.
So again, what this means is not only are there very few Patriots left in Europe, my speculation is that most European countries are holding on to whatever their Ministry of Defense is deeming nationally critical and have given us everything else. And there are really no other Patriots. We can't ask the Israelis for Patriots. We did try prior to the Iran war.
But that actually did work. They were eventually kind of coerced into giving up the remainder of their Patriot supply because they were upgrading to new systems that worked more closely with their other
with the Iron Dome stuff.
David Sling or something like that system. And they haven't the actual makeup of whatever this new Israeli system is remaining pretty secretive. We don't have too many details of it, but it is, I guess, better than the Patriot in some way or another.
Well, hey, so the Israelis no longer have Patriots.
Yeah, they got rid of their Patriots. We got some of them.
Yeah, so there's no Patriot missiles. There are physically not enough Patriot missiles in existence. According to Ukrainian President Zelensky said that we need approximately 300 missiles to make it through the winter, 300 interceptor missiles, that is, to make it through the winter, to make it through all the Russian attacks. I don't believe there are that many physical interceptor missiles existing outside of U.S. stocks.
Even if the political will existed to get Ukraine that number of missiles, if tomorrow, like all of Congress and Donald Trump's heart grows 3 sizes that day and everything works out for the best, hurrah, hurrah, they can't. They don't exist.
And like I said, the manufacturing timeline is 16 to 18 months. What this means is that Ukraine functionally does not and will not have a way to reliably interdict these mass Russian missile attacks, which I can't really stress to you how shitty it's gotten in Kyiv. Maybe it's just from the effect of having my neighborhood bombed and having Anthony narrowly avoid having his apartment blown up. But things aren't great here without interceptors. Again, a missile that is not intercepted doesn't simply fade away, it hits its target. Those targets are very often either civilian buildings or buildings located in civilian areas. And the Russians are not always so precise with their strikes, despite the fact that they're using, in theory, the high precision weapons. The missiles can go off target, they can get confused by EW, or simply, run into some technical issues and really hit anything at all. But it's all in Kyiv. And again, Kyiv is just a normal city filled with normal people. So it's not been great. And it's not going to get better unless we have a equally effective system as Patriots, which has not currently been demonstrated. Maybe the Israelis have their own great solution if, like Anthony said, they haven't exactly been amenable to sharing. So we are looking at a very, very bleak winter, which has been echoed by members of the government. There have been officials from both the energy companies and Kyiv military administration who have both indicated that if you have the capability of leaving Kyiv for the winter, you should. They do say that every winter, quite frankly, because it's true, but I feel like their calls are a little more bleak this time around.
There's one proposed solution to this, is that the United States has promised to give Ukraine the ability to manufacture Patriot missiles, to have a license to produce them. But that has its own problems, of course. As we said, to produce a Patriot missile, if Ukraine had a factory up and running today to make Patriot missiles, it would not be ready, let's say a year and a half. And we don't have that time. Now, of course, that's the problem with everything. The best time to do these things was in 2021. Frankly, the second best time to do them is now. So we can't say not to do something that will be useful in the future when it will still be useful in the future. And it would be real nice if this had happened sooner. But you work with what you got. Two, though, is if there was these factories producing these Patriot missiles, those factories themselves would be open to attack. Ukraine had been able to very significantly create a domestic arms industry that is taking care of most of the country's needs. Like, it's been a real success story in that regard. But a lot of that has to do with the defense industry being pretty spread out. And even then, there will be problems like what happened in Romeo's neighborhood that we talked about last episode. But if they know there's one specific factory that needs to get blown up, they're going to find it and they're going to blow it up.
For example, there used to be some arms manufacturing or some arms industry stuff around Lukyanovska, which is why the Russians keep hitting it over and over again, despite the fact that I'm positive whatever had been there has long been moved out.
Yeah, there's no way that it's still in that building anymore.
And yet they still continue to strike that exact point over and over, stubbornly, just confident that if they just launch one more missile at that McDonald's, they'll win the war.
Now, that, of course, has already been thought of by Ukrainian planners, which was why they are trying to work with Poland and some other countries to manufacturing them together, perhaps to open a factory in Poland itself, or I think Denmark has been in the talks.
Before we get too ahead of ourselves here, this is an offer by Donald Trump.
Yes.
It is not how do I put this politely? It's not a real offer. This isn't a real thing that we're talking about. Ukraine receiving a Patriot production license, a thing that only Japan of any other country in the world has ever received.
There's like one more, but I don't care to look it up right now.
Like, I'm sorry, no, Ukraine is not getting a Patriot production license. Donald Trump is not going to give us a Patriot production license. It's just another carrot to wave in front of Ukraine. So what was the last thing they asked us to do?
Yeah, so the last thing they asked us to do was there had been these attacks on Russian shipping, especially oil export, that kind of thing, and Ukraine had targeted Russian shipping specifically out of Novorossiysk was what prompted this request. And the United States said, please stop doing that. This is being used to export gas from Kazakhstan. And actually, American oil companies had a share in these Kazakh companies, and therefore it was harming American business. That's the thing with all this oil, natural gas sanctions that America is going along with and is being much more strict with than any other anti-Russian action. It's because Russia is a competitor of the United States. And by putting sanctions on Russian, especially liquefied natural gas, that gets rid of a competitor to American companies. But in this case, it also affected American companies, and therefore the logic of it works against Ukraine in this case. And so J.D. Vance put pressure on Ukraine to no longer target this particular export route. And it was held over Ukraine's head of, we could give you these Patriot missile systems, but you have to do what we tell you to do. And there'll always be something else. There'll always be another demand, another form of coercion, and this will be just strung along. It's quite obvious that's how it will work.
Yeah, so to wrap up this little segment, we don't have Patriot interceptors. We are likely not going to receive any notable amount of Patriot interceptors anytime soon, and the winter is looking pretty bad.
That will move on, but with our Patreon plug. If you would like to support Ukraine Without Hype,
and we sure wish you would.
It would be nice, especially considering that now my stuff is blown up. It's going to be taken care of by the city, I think, but nonetheless, not good times over here. And it would give me a bit more financial security if more people sign up for the Patreon. So that's patreon.com/Ukraine without hype. Join our Discord. Give us input on what you want to hear about in these episodes, how we will expand and on topics and other forms in the future. I have a few special projects in the pipeline actually that I am excited about. So again, patreon.com/Ukraine without hype. And also to support our primary employer, New Voice of Ukraine, you can go to english.nv.ua and patreon.com/nvua. So a lot of this episode, about half of my script I'm looking at right now, will actually be dealing with various war-related updates. We have not talked about the actual battlefield so much in recent episodes, but we have a number of possible things now. And the first is that, you know, the maps, right? The war maps, the open source maps of how things go. Well, those maps have been a less and less reliable, or I don't want to say reliable. It's not like they're lying. Precise is the mathematic term there. They've been less and less precise over how things go, partially due to the nature of the war right now being very much about these vast areas of gray zone, or as it's usually called now, kill zone, where who knows what controls anyone at any particular point in time. This stretches like 20 kilometers wide in some places. So the idea of a map being especially accurate is a shady thing right now, though people have continued to try. But the latest update is that the operational security of some of these recent developments along the Huyapola sector have been kind of officially confirmed. Some of these have already been more or less known if you follow, you know, the videos and things, the open source intelligence that have come out, so it's not a complete surprise. But it does show that there has been a very serious and successful series of Ukrainian counteroffensives in this Huliopolo sector that have liberated like a dozen, 2 dozen villages in that area. The effect of this has pushed the Russians away from some of the defense lines behind Donbass, and therefore decreasing some of the threat of the Russians being able to envelop the positions in Donbass from multiple directions. So that's one positive thing about it. It also slows down the Russian advance towards Dnipro and other cities on that axis. And this is not a huge gain. If you are not used to looking at these maps, it would not look like a particularly large area, but strategically it has been quite important. There also seems to be a similar thing happening north of Slovyansk, but again, that is relying on information that will be officially released who knows when, but the conditions on the battlefield right now basically come down to that, where the Russians have been making gains up through Kostantinivka, which is bad. It is the southern part of the fortress belt. The Russians said that they captured Kostantinivka like 2 months ago at this point and still have not, because they keep doing that because their supporters don't seem to care about being lied to. They will just keep on repeating that Russia has captured Kostantinivka, and just mysteriously, Russians keep dying on the streets of Kostantinivka. Mysteriously. Who knows how that happens when they control it? And this line has been so very, very common. Meanwhile, on other parts of the front, which the Russians have not prioritized, we can say that the Ukrainians have been able to push back. Some of the analysis I have seen is that the give and take has been more or less even within these recent months, where both Russia and Ukraine have taken and lost roughly equal amounts of territory, which is a good thing overall, we can say. Obviously, the battle in Kostantinivka is as a bad omen for how things can go in the future, but this is a war of dragging the Russians into bad situations, and right now they do not overall have the initiative. If Russia does not have the initiative, that means they're losing. That's how an invasion works. If you're not moving forward, you're losing. But also, we have to talk about some more of this long-range strikes and naval strikes, which we have talked a bit before in the previous episodes, but have really gotten to much larger heights. And that Main thing that is being talked about in Russian circles anyway is a continuous effect on attacks on the Wildberries warehouses. Wildberries is the Russian equivalent to like an Amazon. It is a place where individual vendors are able to sell things to people using Wildberries as an intermediary. Just think exactly how Amazon works. That's how Wildberries works. Not really much of a actual difference. And it is a huge business in Russia. So this was targeted though, because they're also selling military gear. It is dual use. It is a dual use target, meaning it is a valid target. It's not just bombing civilian stuff, despite what Russian propaganda may be saying about it.
Mind you, that is what the Russians have done in response. They have bombed just a civilian warehouse.
Yeah. And so the response, quote unquote, to this has been bombing epicenters, rosetkas, novoposhtas, these Ukrainian logistics centers, and have caused pretty serious damage to the Ukrainian economy because of it.
Yeah, for example, Rosetka, which is the Ukrainian version of Amazon, basically, it's one of the main marketplaces. The recent strike on their warehouse burnt up about $70 million worth of assets on top of millions of dollars in customer in goods that were not directly owned by Rosetta. The co-founder of Rosetta said that basically without state help, their company is going to close in a month. It's hard to imagine because Rosetta is a pretty monolithic staple of Ukrainian commerce, but the Russians have not been shy about striking our economy back.
But the thing is with this idea of it being a response still gets to me because they've been doing this. They've bombed so many epicenters before now. I don't even know how many Nova Poshta employees have died. Like, it's not a new part of the war. Arguably, maybe this has caused a reprioritization on attacking these things by Russia to get some kind of payback or something. But it's not new at all. Like, they have targeted like power plants less and are using those missiles more on these warehouses instead. Maybe like everything Russia does, it has a limited amount of resources and has to use those resources in ways it prioritizes. And right now, it's prioritizing civilian logistics. So you can say that that is a response to something, but it's all ultimately the same thing. On the Russian side of things, though, the Russian economy is also being hit pretty hard by these things, and the this company, Wildberries itself, is basically just completely screwing over its vendors. I'm not gonna shed a tear for these Russians selling things to this website, but on an economic level, it is causing some pretty serious damage. They are not being bailed out. Wildberries has also put stops in place that will not allow these vendors to take things out of the remaining warehouses. All these people are very spooked that their stuff will be blown up next in the next attack and are trying to like move it somewhere else. Wildberries said, no, you're keeping it here. Managers of Wildberries have said some very callous things in the Russian media about this, basically saying it's like that's your patriotic duty to just take one on the chin right now and keep doing business through us, even though you don't want to. And apparently Wildberries also has some kind of like financial sector to it as well that I don't fully understand because I don't understand finance. But apparently, through the various small business loans and such that go through this company, if they were to fold, it would cause a cascading effect that would really tear through the Russian economy, taking out a lot of small businesses, and it's looking like it could go in that direction. So yes, Ukraine is hurting, Russia's hurting. The other thing that's going on right now is this expansion of fighting in the Black Sea. As we just talked about, Ukraine has very much been targeting oil and gas export terminals, both in the Black Sea as well as the Caspian Sea, which we can talk about in a moment. And that has continued to exacerbate this problem, which we talked about in the last episode of oil and gas shortages. So we're entering a very interesting part of the war. Interesting in that it is a bit new, but very bad for certainly us, them as well, but I don't care about them, of the civilian economies taking a very direct hit, and neither government having a very good response to it, though at least Rosetka isn't telling all of its vendors that they can just go screw themselves. But that's always kind of the difference, is that Russia always has to add an extra kick in the balls to everything bad that happens. But this type of war, and I don't want to go into it too much right now because I do have an idea for a later project about this, and also we don't really know how far this has gone yet. But this is starting to affect the Russian social contract, which is that if you're a Russian, you are not only allowed to, but often encouraged to just not care about anything. The war happens far away. You're expected to have a level of support of the war, but you don't have to do anything about it. Unless, you're a poor person from an ethnic minority group, then you're very much expected to join the military. But for the Moscow middle class who would run these online companies, the Russian government wants to make sure that you can't tell that you're in a war, that there is no social pressure on the important people in the country. And that's starting to change. This social contract of shut up and just support us and don't oppose us. You can do your own thing. And most importantly, part of the social contract going back to like the 2000s, you as a Muscovite middle class person will have full access to the modern neoliberal economy and all of the toys that goes with it. That is slowly no longer becoming true. Meanwhile, there have been basically dry runs of a mobilization in Penza. So Russia has not started to do a mobilization, a mass mobilization, but has kind of started putting the pieces together in order to have one in the near future. Some people think as early as this fall, perhaps. And that again goes to this idea of you are not allowed to ignore the war anymore, when that is what Russians have been promised. Which means that this social contract is going to be breaking very, very soon, is in the process of breaking right now. And when this social contract breaks, a new one will have to be made. This will either be basically just chaos, they can't find anything to replace it, and increase pressure to bring the war to at least a standstill, some kind of ceasefire to stop this particular problem, or it'll be rewritten in the form of more direct fascism, of you are now expected to support the war in a material way. You're now expected to kind of suffer some of the costs of the war. You're now expected to actually notice that a war is occurring and you have to do something. Something is being demanded of you. And if they accept that, that is kind of a new country. That's a new contract. That's a new unwritten constitution that they have going. And we don't know what that will look like yet. We don't know fully how they're fully reacting to the ongoing oil crisis. Not quite enough time has passed on that yet. But by the end of the year, I think we'll know. But that takes us to this attack on an Iranian tanker in the Caspian Sea. Again, part of this broader campaign against Russian logistics. On July 28th, Ukraine struck an Iranian vessel headed for Russia with apparently military cargo. One sailor had died. And after this strike on an Iranian vessel in which one sailor died, after that happened, the Iranian government started getting real jingoistic. We're going to strike back at Ukraine. How dare you attack us? We're going to hit back with our missiles against Ukrainian targets. For a few days there, it got really heated between Iran and Ukraine again. And even though Iran really is a co-belligerent in this war, it is supporting Russia in many ways. And reportedly, Iranians had even controlled some of the Shahed drones that attacked Ukraine, though that the sourcing on that is not completely 100%. That doesn't mean that the two governments act like they're directly at war with each other. So this attack on an Iranian vessel led to some heated talk. The Ukrainians, for their part, said, well, no, you are to quote the foreign minister here, quote, the regime in Tehran is a direct accomplice to Russian aggression against Ukraine, fueling Moscow's criminal war with the weapons that have killed Ukrainians since 2022. And again, Iran threats until a few days later, they just agree to act like it was an accident. I don't think it was an accident. Ukraine had bragged about how successful this Caspian Sea campaign had been. Especially since, notice I'm saying Caspian Sea, not Black Sea. Look at a map. They're not connected to each other. It is on the other side of Russia, bordering with Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and Iran and all that. That's a little bit further off. So the fact this campaign happened further away was proving the efficacy of Ukrainian long-range attacks. So I don't think this was really an accident, in my opinion. But Ukraine said it was an accident. Iran accepted the apology and kind of moved on, which was funny, but people just kind of accept these things. However, in the midst of all this, we definitely have the American neoconservatives, Israel supporters, really trying to push this idea of quote unquote merging the Iran war. And this was something not only that was said by uh, neoconservatives, Republicans in the US, trying to bring in an unpopular Iran war with a much more popular defense of Ukraine to bolster their own stance. But on the other side of things, the Russians were saying, oh, this is further proof that this is all just a massive plot by Israel to do whatever, whatever. And really, this isn't true from either direction. Ukraine has its own war with Iran, which is very separate from the war that is going on between the US and Iran. The war that Ukraine has with Iran is barely declared. They're all kind of pretending like it's not happening and just saying belligerent things every once in a while Iran is, of course, aiding in this attack.
I mean, it did seem like we did our best to ignore Iran
Yeah, I've been
up
trying to ignore it.
until pretty much now.
But yeah, like both sides are trying to avoid this confrontation. And as we were talking about the Patriot situation, the reason why Ukraine is so screwed right now, while I personally feel very much in danger right now, is because of the Iran war. If there is more of an Iran war in the near future, which always looks like it can happen, that means more Patriot missiles will be used by the Americans, by the Emiratis, by the Bahrainis, and those are Patriot missiles that can't be used by Ukraine. The ideal situation for Ukraine right now is for the conflict in the Gulf to just end, because any resource that goes over there is not coming over here, and that is really, really bad for us if it's going over there instead. So this idea of these wars merging, of trying to get Ukraine to support further conflict with Iran, would be so utterly catastrophic, it would be one of the worst possible things that could happen right now. And so these hawks in the US, they're trying to merge these wars, they're trying to bring Ukraine and the support that Ukraine has to back their unpopular wars with Iran. That is working against Ukraine. I cannot say that more clearly. Anyone who's saying that right now, we're going to be brushing over Laura Loomer, whatever, we'll just bring it up right now. We had Laura Loomer come into Ukraine to do her stupid little tour. If you're listening to us, I assume you've seen that news because it's been over everything. The purpose for her trip to the US as like a Trump proxy has been to bring support for Ukraine on board with support for the Iran war. A lot of people here have been treating that as like a good thing. Oh, we're finally going to get Trump on our side. No, they're trying to get this very devastating policy to go through. That is working against Ukraine, no matter what you say, no matter what you think you're doing at the time. That would be really, 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 really bad. I can't emphasize this enough. That would be catastrophic. So no, we can't merge these wars.
Also, quite frankly, there's no reason for Ukraine to involve itself in any campaign in the Middle East. It has very little to do with us. It's very far away. What do people always say about Ukraine? It's foreign people tying very far away. Nothing to do with us.
Kind of busy right now. And any utility that Iran could have had with Russia is over by now. Really? Like there's nothing to gain from that except this weird, stupid game of trying to get the personal affections of Donald Trump.
Which, as Anthony very quite rightly pointed out, is the stupidest possible game you can fucking think of.
It's impossible. He doesn't have human emotions.
He doesn't like things. The thing that he likes, he decided he likes in 1987 between railing lines of coke, and he has not changed. He will not change. That his entire personality frozen in that time. without a time machine to go back to that 1987 party on Trump Tower with a bunch of cocaine, you're just not going to get him to care about shit anymore.
The next episode, which is already in the production process right now, pre-production, will deal more with some of the shifts going on in the Republican Party, some of the background of how they are adjusting to Ukraine right now, especially vis-a-vis Iran, but also due to internal conflicts going on within the right. There's a lot to it. That's why I'm going to give it its own episode. But just for purposes right here, please don't merge these wars, is all I have to say. But we can move on to that for now. To the exact opposite side of the Eurasian continent, to the Kuril Islands. Romeo, take it away.
So over the past few, I'd say about half a year or so, Japan has really upped its diplomatic efforts in Ukraine. They've sent a bunch of high-ranking officials over. They've been doing a bunch of cultural outreach for, I think, obvious reasons. The Japanese, like many other nations facing possible military conflict in their near-term future, want to know what we do with drones. And as a result, they are trying to get us to share what we know about what we do with drones. This has strained relations, let's say, between Russia and Japan. So they've had this territorial dispute for about 80 years now, since the Second World War. So the Russian-Japanese relations have never been stellar, but they have significantly been going down. A notable point of this, and the source of this dispute, is an island chain that stretches out from a portion of Russia to Japan called the Kuril Islands, and the territorial dispute has been over the Kuril Islands, which Putin has visited now for the first time, I believe, ever. He visited the kind of capital island where the administrative capital is located, and toured a factory and had some red salmon roe, one of the few things the Kuril Island actually produces. That is exported to the rest of Russia. And obviously this has caused quite a bit of a stir with the Japanese.
And military exercises, keep in mind. This is the main idea of this was to visit the exercises for the Pacific Fleet.
Yeah, like he wasn't just putting on a show, though obviously a lot of it was a show. He got to finally, one of the things that Putin has been criticized, I guess, about over the course of the full-scale invasion is that he is a bunker president, that he hides himself away from the people, etc., etc. Well, here on, what was it, today? It was actually today he finally met with Russian citizens on the Kuril Island. There are tons of photos of him glad-handing and being in the middle of crowds. I also have to note that he as far away from this war as it is physically possible to be without leaving Russia.
I mean, there's like Kamchatka he could go to.
At the very least, it's more remote.
Yeah, it's not physically connected to the rest of Russia. You cannot walk to Ukraine from there, no matter how long you may go. I guess that's a measure of it.
So as a result, the Japanese summoned the Russian ambassador and, protested for whatever that counts, which is nothing. But it does show that Putin is not afraid to ruffle feathers. For a while there, he diplomatically tried it seemed like he was trying to play nice and get the world on his side, but he seems to have given up on this, and he's happy to antagonize any nation that is showing, let's say, greater interest and involvement in Ukraine affairs.
The other thing I can point out here, though, is that it is taking place with the Pacific Fleet. And this is something that Russia has largely been ignoring lately. They very famously used the army that was stationed in the east. That was the army that attacked Kiev specifically. All these people dragged a continent away to come attack Kiev, their rightful home, I suppose. But this sector has been pretty disregarded by a lot of analysts, in part because East Asia, that belongs to China, right? Like, anything that Russia does in this area, they are not going to do without Chinese permission. China is the power there, especially in East Asia. But there's one thing about the Pacific Fleet, in that it's the only fleet right now that's not pinned down. The Black Sea Fleet, half of it's blown up, the rest of it is confined to dry dock. The Baltic Fleet, with Finnish NATO ascension, that basically blocks off the entrance into St. Petersburg if a conflict is to occur. What used to be a pretty open sea for Russia, with Finland and Sweden being more neutral, is now a NATO lake. The North Sea, they have to go around Norway to get out of there, but is this Pacific fleet is the one that still has freedom of navigation that the others don't. So I do think that in the future, Russia will try to have more of a presence in East Asia, and this is signaling that just so they have a feeling of at least breathing room, of not being completely hemmed in, and being able to engage more with China directly. So I don't know what's going on there now, but I have a feeling in my gut that we'll be hearing more about the Russian Far East within the next year. And our last bit of conflict-related news, we can say, is a drone attack on a Ukrainian plane, but not in Ukraine. So, Romeo, could you give us a rundown on this one as well?
Yeah. The Russians are, I don't know, there used to be a real popular word in regard to this war, a little word called escalation would be invoked anytime Ukraine would basically want to hurt the Russians in any way that wasn't directly defending against attack. And this was tarred as escalation this, escalation that. It was used so often that, to be quite frank, the word has lost its meaning for me. I no longer know what it means or what it points to. But if I had to guess, I would say that trying to blow up a Ukrainian plane sitting in a German airport would probably qualify. Of course, the word means nothing, so I'm not going to use it anymore. But that is precisely what the Germans did a few days ago. I was recording, reportedly, according to German media, there was an Antonov Ukrainian cargo plane parked in Leipzig airport. It was reportedly carrying ammunition to be transferred to Ukraine, and a drone tried to blow it up. It was caught on the airport security cameras. There's a little drone, flies in, flies straight at one of the airplane's wings. And for people who do not know how airplanes work, that is where the fuel is stored. So the reason you attack an airplane's wings is because if you put explosives into it, it can go boom. Luckily for all involved, the Germans, the Ukrainians, and honestly, quite probably the Russians, the drone did not explode. It, in fact, it instead bounced off the plane. The explosive device, which German media categorized as a Semtex explosive device, had detached itself during the impact and had not detonated, flown a little bit away. The drone itself crashed, and airport staff found the drone and noticed all of this happening a couple of hours later. So miraculously, nothing happened. However, obviously, the German government's been incredibly cagey with attributing actual accountability for this attack. But come on, guys. None of us were born yesterday. It's quite obviously the Russians. Whether this was a military operation or this was a paid terrorist or something, we don't know. The German military has indicated that the drone was a non-commercial type that could indicate anything from someone 3D printing and scratch building one in their garage to an actual military qualification of drone. It's very hard to tell. But at the very least, we can guess that it was probably military drone equipped with heavy explosives. And there's only a couple of nations that use those in Europe. And I highly doubt we ourselves would try to blow up our own ammo plane in Germany. What does this tell us overall? I think it tells us that the Russians are feeling, let's say, if not more confident, they are feeling freer to act than perhaps they have been in the last year and a half. They have clearly seen that Europe is not responding to very serious intrusions of their territory. They can see that the Europeans are not reacting really to the Russian intelligence operations, of which it feels sometimes like there is a new Russian intelligence operation being exposed in Europe every week. The Europeans, they are currently arguing over whether it is fair or not to ban Russian soldiers who served in the full-scale invasion from getting tourist visas to visit Paris. So, but yeah, Putin feels pretty emboldened, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, and talking about escalation, this is really nothing new per se. Well, this specific type of action is new, but Russia has been attacking various European countries this entire time, even before the full-scale invasion. I did segments on this before. I did a video on for this for NV like a year ago at this point. This is very routine at this point. They have been cutting undersea cables. They have been doing a massive amount of arson. In Warsaw, for example, they burned down a mall, a bunch of military warehouses. This one this one Bulgarian guy has had his like fourth warehouse blown up recently, and they've tried to kill him. These attacks are routine. Every single European country, every single NATO member in Europe has had these attacks against them. One would think that it would qualify for an Article 5 type intervention at some point, or at least an Article 4 to say, hey, notice that Russia keeps attacking us and we're doing nothing about it, except for some, electronic warfare, some like counter hacking, the thing that you would do anyway as just a private company to stop your stuff from being hacked into. They're not doing much beyond that.
They have raised debates on whether they shouldn't give visas to serving Russian soldiers.
Yeah, it's absurd.
A
Why are you
a
allowing these
brave
people in?
stance for the Europeans to take 5 years into a full-scale invasion.
And that's not talking about all the various air incursions by drones and missiles. Just recently in Poland, a KH-101 missile hit a field in Tarnawa in eastern Poland near Lublin. The Poles just kind of let it happen. They said, oh, it's not going to hit anything important, just let it crash. A lot of things have happened in Romania pretty persistently at this point. They're debating maybe on the think tank side of things, barely even the government side of things, to maybe perhaps have some kind of joint air defense system going on between them, which seems like such an obvious thing, but no one wants to look like they're in conflict with Russia. Despite all this stuff about how dangerous NATO is to Russia, that NATO is such a threat to Russia that they had to invade Ukraine over it. Yet these NATO countries are being directly attacked by Russia again and again and again, like the Skripal poisoning, and they actively avoid even acknowledging it as a war. They're so conflict avoidant with Russia, they are willing to take actual attacks. But apparently that makes them a threat. I don't know.
I
I
mean,
don't think
we
that's how
can
threat
even
works.
game out the response of what would have happened if that drone had actually exploded. My guess is the response would have been exactly the same as we see with it not exploding.
Yeah,
Everyone
'cause
would have gone, "Oh, so
we know what
sad."
explosions have done.
Yeah, "Oh, so sad. Well, this sucks. There's a war on," and then they cry and do nothing.
And within the last year, there have been drones flying around European airports as far away as Ireland, actually. And everyone has known that these drones are there as a way to test the responsiveness of these airfields. Like if we are able to drive this drone around for X amount of time and not have anything happen to it, we'll push that a little bit farther the next time and a little bit further the next time, and now we have this. There could have been better defenses around airfields. There could have been an official acknowledgement that this is even happening, which they are very loath to do. We've seen this buildup of this specific type of attack for the last year leading up to this. And again, no real response, which means they'll go further next time and further next time until there actually is this World War III, because Europe just refuses to shut things down at an earlier phase that they can. The earliest phase was 2014. The earlier phase in that was 2008. The earlier phase of that was 1993. But still, just let it slide until worse and worse and worse happens. I say actually, within the last week was the anniversary of the invasion of Georgia as well, which nothing happened about. But that will wrap up this segment on war things with this very foreboding tone that, of course, it's going to get worse in Europe because no one does anything. And now I'll be covering domestic topics in Ukraine, and that right now has everything to do with the protest movement. Last episode, we went into very exhaustive detail about what the protest means. We talked about it for like an hour. So if you want to know more about the motivations behind the protests, listen to last episode. And as I was releasing that episode that very day was the news that General Syrski had been forced to resign, fulfilling one, anyway, of the demands of the protest movement. But what has happened since then? Well, the protests are still ongoing. They meet every single day. And in fact, last weekend had the largest singular protest since Euromaidan. So this is very obviously not something that people feel has been concluded. The most concrete demand so far has been reinstating Fedorov as the Minister of Defense. But that's clearly not going to happen.
Yeah, though, despite the fact that the protests are notionally still about getting Fedorov back into the Ministry of Defense, the man himself has said, initially he had said that he won't work with Zelensky in any job except as MOD, but it's been weeks and weeks. He is clearly not going to, he's clearly not going back to working with Zelensky. Zelensky's not going to work with him. It is getting to the point where people are asking themselves, what is the point of these protests already? Because, Anthony, like you pointed out, 50% of the goal was achieved. Syrski was fired. Drapati is back in action. In fact, the downstream effects of Syrski being out of favor, which is his favored unit Scalia, is now being, let's say, being put under new management. It's currently been put under Azov Operational Command instead of acting as a separate unit. So a lot of what the protesters had wanted to achieve is occurring, but this specific call is still ongoing, and it is, I don't see a world in which Fedorov goes back to the Ministry of Defense after so long, to be honest.
Yeah, that's clearly not going to happen, but I think there is a separate trend happening now in that the protests had become kind of a catalyst for pretty much every complaint that people would have about the government right now. In the context of this protest, it was drawn into to other protests about the raise in subway fares even. A lot of the people who protested in that spot would just go down the street to the city hall and protest against the rise in transit fares. There are also protests against potentially illegal development of this nature preserve. It feels like there's a lot bubbling up right now, and there's not a great place for it to go. And right now, the channel that's being sent through is these protests that still have a ton of social support. That when they say we want to have a big protest, that big protest happens. But what do you do with that energy when the president's office seems to just ignore it outright? There is a political movement happening right now, but it's going through this birthing process where it's trying to find out what exactly it is, how it can sustain itself, what kind of social and other support it will have. Ukrainian political figures will try to attach themselves to it to try to get a boost from it. Something's happening here. It's too early to say what, though, and we can just try to see how this happens because, as we keep on saying, politics is back. This is a continuation of last year's protest movement in every way. The same kind of groups are coming out for it. The same aesthetic is being used of these cardboard signs. It's very being acknowledged as such, of being tied into anti-corruption, of all these things. But we don't have electoral politics. We don't have party politics for it to turn into something other than a street.
And I also have to mention that Zelensky fatigue is very real. People are real tired of President Zelensky for various reasons, the corruption included, but also it's the fact that this war has been going on for 5 years, and people are mentally exhausted. They are looking for any possible outlet to show their dissatisfaction with reality, and This is one of them, I suppose. Though, again, unless Ukraine is willing to take extra constitutional actions, Zelensky's here for as long as this war's on.
And just to loop it back into Loomer, so those following the visit of U.S. far-right political agitator, is really all she is, Laura Loomer, on her visit to Ukraine, you may notice that she met with everybody. She met with Zelensky. She met with Beletsky, the head of Third Assault, with all these very important figures. I think she was the first person to get an interview with the new Minister of Defense, or acting Minister of Defense. He still needs to be affirmed by Parliament, which is not in session yet. I think she got the first interview with him, and that's messed up because a lot of these problems right now are being exacerbated by the simple fact that Zelensky and Bankova and the official government is not directly addressing any of it. They'll say like, "Oh, we hear that there's problems," and they'll do things like they obviously fired Sersky. Like things happen, but even then it wasn't, "Oh, we had this dialogue with the protest movement. We had this dialogue with community." No, it's just they did things and expected stuff to happen afterwards. That wasn't a dialogue process.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest complaints that you hear from protesters is not even the fact of the decision making, but the fact that the administration does not explain to to its citizens why it is taking the actions it's taking. A lot of this, of course, has to do with the fact that the wartime requires some level of discretion. However, Ukraine has always had a pretty open political system, and people are really chafing that the government has very happily just abdicated its need to explain any of its actions. Like Anthony says, it'll do things, and then the explanation it'll give for doing this will either be irrelevant or something completely trivial and will have nothing to do with the actual actions that they take, which also leads people to feel like they're being taken advantage of they're being infantilized when they are not even being told why things are happening. For example, there is no good. Zelensky didn't actually give a good reason for firing Sirski. He fired him, obviously, because he is incredibly unpopular and there's a protest movement to force him out. But Zelensky never admitted that. All he said was, well, clearly he can't be effective anymore. But you can actually explain what was wrong. You can explain why you didn't want to fire him before. You can do anything at all. But Zelensky, who from the very beginning, he's never wanted to really explain to the people what he's doing. There was the infamous press marathon in the first or second year of his term, where after ignoring Ukrainian media for like the first year, he gathered everyone into a room for like 20 hours and then answered quote unquote every question they gave or whatever the hell. And stunts like this made it very clear that he just does not feel like explaining himself to anyone, but especially the Ukrainian press. Every interview he gives nowadays is to Western public figures or the Western press. He basically doesn't talk to the Ukrainian media at all. And we can see that people are not happy about this. They like to know why their leader is doing things or not doing things. And not having that kind of feedback is very rightly pissing a lot of people off.
So in the middle of this very specific complaint that Zelensky is having a very, hostile relationship with the Ukrainian media, is not talking to the Ukrainian protest movement, is not talking to like the veterans who were making these demands of the government to do these things. Again, we just said Skelia, this problematic unit, is basically being broken up, having its leadership like go to jail. Like these are things that were wanted, but not explained. Like that's two parts of it. Like it's good that it happened, but say so. And in the middle of all that, here comes this American just political entertainer, gets the red carpet rolled out for her. People noticed that, and people got mad about that as well. Rounding off this episode on international news, specifically in Poland and Kosovo, To continue with the kind of ongoing troubles in Poland regarding Ukraine, there hasn't been too many changes on that front. There has been, as we've been talking about, attempts by some of the higher political leadership to try to contain what they let loose. But at the same time, violence against Ukrainians continues to be on the rise. There are continuous incidences that are being shared in video, usually involving some drunken Polish guy going up to some Ukrainian, or sometimes not even Ukrainian. They're just attacking random Poles at this point, too, where they just say, oh, you're Ukrainian, you're Bandera, you're talking the wrong language, and just tries to beat them up. It's not slowing down. The Polish politicians aren't really doing anything about it. And yeah, like there's going to be drunken gopniks that start fights with people. There's going to be racist idiots. There's going to be just problem people. There's going to be drunks. But they're very simple minded people. They've had this idea put in the brain that this is okay. These people have very poor impulse control, and the Polish right has introduced this impulse to them that it's okay to attack Ukrainian, that's okay to do your patriotic duty to assault an ethnic minority. That's out there now. It's hard to stop a brainworm like that, especially amongst these social rejects who are already, again, mostly drunk. That said, Polish society has started to come out against it. There have been demonstrations and protests to try to stop this harassment of Ukrainians in the country. Polish people are doing their part to try to fix whatever is going on right now, whatever broken thing is happening right now. But at the same time, there have been recent opinion polls showing that the opinion of Ukrainians, of Ukraine in Poland, is at its lowest level basically ever since these things have been collected. And it's to be hard to reverse that. Whatever information campaign started by somebody, whatever trend going on right now, whatever series of conspiracy theories and memes and just contagious idiocy that is going on will require a broad-based political, social pushback, and it is too politically advantageous to build on these populist, xenophobic feeling for that to happen. But there's one very fascinating thing that happened within Polish politics. And that is last episode, I was talking about how the former Polish leader, Morawiecki, had been rising again in Polish politics as a counterpoint to the presumptive next candidate for prime minister from the PIS party, Przemysław Czarnek, who is out of the far right, who is really promoting all of these anti-Ukrainian feelings and statements, and that this center-right politician challenging this far-right politician and generally succeeding was a good path for the future. Now, Morawiecki had founded what was called the Development Plus parliamentary bloc. Forming this parliamentary bloc, Development Plus, of various center-right figures within the PIS, really started to brush up against the party leadership. This was starting to look like a schism was starting to appear. This was 40 members. This is not a little thing of just like a dozen people or 5 people. This was 40 members of parliament that had signed on to this, not party, but like sub-party. So PIS had a meeting, got together, and said, you cannot have other party allegiances besides our own. You cannot have factionalism, as Stalin would say. So they said, leave Development Plus, come back into the good graces of the party. And they said no, causing an actual schism within PIS, creating this new party of Development Plus under Morawiecki. Or at least not quite a party yet. He said that it would be turned into a party by October, so not too long from now. I assume there's a lot of bureaucratic steps to go through to create an actual political party. Where the people are there. They have left, forming their new thing, splitting the center-right away from the further right. But there are some different places this can go to with elections. If there's going to be a right-wing coalition, it will require PIS and Development Plus to bind together, to run together to form a government. Neither one of these, obviously, would be able to get a majority on their own. It was already looking unlikely that they could get their own majority as a united party. So it's possible, if there's not too many bad feelings, that they would form a coalition anyway. And perhaps the fact that there is this center-right party would lure some people back into it, some people who were scared off by some of the more extremes that are happening in PIS, say that I no longer have to vote for PIS, I can instead vote for Development Plus, which is closer to what I believe, bring in some of those wayward voters, bring in some of those people who are afraid of the further extremes of the far right to something they are more comfortable with, and in that way have a broader right-wing coalition that can more safely win the elections. That's something I don't want to happen, but it's something that very easily could happen. Or they could decide that they are, after all, closer in ideology to the Civic Coalition, their previous opponents. That could also happen. Maybe a center coalition between Civic Coalition, which is itself already kind of a center-right party, with Development Plus, which is another center-right party. That could also happen. Elections next year just got a lot more interesting. But now there's something else that is dogging the PIS party. As you may remember from our Hungary episode, I said that there are these two fugitive former Polish politicians who had fled to Hungary and had been living there in exile. These were Marcin Romanowski and Zbigniew Ziobro. Ziobro had already fled to the United States. But there's a question of where the other one was. It seemed like the United States would be an obvious answer. Donald Trump likes his mafia guys, and Ziobro had already gotten his safety in the US, so why not this other guy, Romanowski? But we finally seem to have our answer of where he showed up. Transnistria ended up in the Russian-occupied breakaway region of Moldova, Transnistria, that is completely run by the combination of the mafia and the Russian security services. Now, these two politicians had already been dogged by accusations of being Russian puppets. Again, this guy is a former Deputy Minister of Justice of Poland. Not a small fry. Former Deputy Minister of Justice went to this mafia enclave. Reportedly. Allegedly, I guess. It hasn't been 100% confirmed. It seems true, though. If it wasn't true, if this is all being falsely reported, okay, just gonna throw out there that that's a possibility. But it seems as though it's true. And if it is true, he would not have gone there unless he already had connections to the Russian security services. And this is a high up in the Polish PIS party. This is an observation that has already been shared throughout the Polish political space. Isn't it kind of weird how this guy ran directly into the hands of the FSB, kind of confirming every suspicion they had of him? Meanwhile, PIS just tries to not say anything that their former colleague was obviously a Russian asset. But Polish politics, elections are going to be so interesting and scary. And finally, that brings us to Kosovo, in something that really did not need to happen, something that will probably not have too many side effects, but also did not need to happen. And that is, for some reason, Zelensky decided to make a state visit to Serbia. The thing with Serbia is that it is a very pro-Russian country, and has been for, centuries at this point. World War I basically happens because Russia and Serbia have such a close relationship with each other. And in fact, it has been a common enough story for Russians who are against the war, don't want to be involved in the war, flee the country and set up shop in Belgrade, where they are then met by ultranationalist Serbs who support Putin, support the war, support all that. So it's anti-war Russians in a conflict with pro-Putin Serbians in the country that they go to. It's a very unique set of circumstances. But at the same time, Serbia is a country with a lot of weapons that Ukraine needed. And so Ukraine has, directly or indirectly, purchased a lot of these. artillery shells and other weaponry, especially a lot of, the older weaponry that was very necessary in the early stages of the war before newer systems could be acquired. So it's not as though Ukraine has zero relationship with Serbia in that regard. It's not as though Serbia has 100% sided with Russia on this. There is a but also to everything involved here, but also Serbia has supported Russia at many levels of their government, given sympathies for Russia's war aims. Of course, they haven't joined it on sanctions. Now, I just don't see why there needed to be a state visit here. Serbia gives those weapons because they get money in return. It's not political, it's economic, it's mercantile. You don't need to butter up Vucic in order to get more. If you want more, you pay more. That's all it is. So yeah, I was always very uncomfortable with this. But once Zelensky gets there, in come all the fluffy diplomatic statements, including, quote, Serbia is now on a path, I believe, of rebuilding its independence from Russian influence. They are not a, quote, little Russia. Those are really narratives pushed primarily by Russia. They are an independent state. I believe they should be brought as close as possible to the European Union. Now, in some ways, this statement is not far afield from common European policy. Serbia is trying to join the European Union, not very successfully. A lot of countries within the EU, particularly Germany, have treated Serbia as kind of a regional hegemon to deal with its neighbors around, even as its neighbors have one by one joined NATO and the EU. So it's not like it's a uncommon type of feeling in Europe, but it's not true. The narrative of it's not being a little Russia is not pushed by Russia. Russians typically don't actually care very much about Serbia. It's Serbians who suck up to Russia, not the other way around. That's not the direction that goes in. And then came the statement that really started to cause waves, which was that Zelensky was asked if Ukraine's stance has changed on Kosovo. Serbia still considers Kosovo to be a part of Serbia. Many members of the European Union, though not all of them, as well as the United States, treat Kosovo as an independent country, which is what it is. And Zelensky answered that no, this stance had not changed. They still considered Kosovo to be a part of Serbia, de jure, which immediately caused a lot of bad feelings in Kosovo, as you would expect. If I was a Kosovar, I would be very mad. If I was an Albanian, I'd be very mad. Because Kosovo, despite the fact that it is not recognized by Ukraine, has been a very pro-Ukrainian country. There was a banner in the center of Pristina that said that they supported Ukraine, and that banner's now gone. That is goodwill that did not have to be attacked. And it was. A very stupid move by the administration. Because they did not have to announce this policy. They did not have to go to Serbia. They could have just shut up and not said anything. Not pick at that wound. And nobody would have noticed. It would have been fine. It was an unforced error. Now I was starting to write something about all this, but really, I want to just defer to a journalist from Pristina, Kosovo, named Una Hajari, and read her thread because she said everything better than what I could have said anyway. In response to popular demand, a thread on why Zelensky's statement rejecting Kosovo's independence is so problematic, and why getting the facts right here matters from someone who's covered both countries as a journalist. Kosovo and Ukraine share striking historic parallels. Language, identity, and political rights were denied to both, and during their worst periods, both were kept weak and stifled by powerful neighbors, or for Kosovo by Belgrade, which governed it as part of Serbia. Both are claimed as the quote-unquote heartland of their neighbors' ethnic identity. Both are framed as having been stolen by the West, and both are subject to intense historical revisionism, or, at minimum, ultranationalist rhetoric from their more powerful neighbors. Zelensky should realize that Putin's obsession with Kosovo isn't really about Kosovo. It's about Russians fearing countries in their own sphere of influence being encouraged to act independently of it. He used the exact same logic to invade Ukraine twice. Whether the Western role in supporting what became an independent country is legitimate can be debated. But Zelensky has certainly used the same argument that Ukraine needs help breaking away from a far more powerful neighbor as his case to garner support for the war. Precisely because of this, Kosovo has been supportive of Ukraine from day one, despite not being recognized by it. Kosovo helped train demining experts, hosted Ukrainian journalists and politicians, kept reiterating that it understands Ukraine's position better than most. Then there's Crimea. Kosovo became independent on the basis that Western powers deemed Serbia was, after years of failed negotiations and agreements, incapable of guaranteeing the rights of the majority population of its southern province. Even after the bombing, Kosovo didn't become independent. The UN stepped in to manage Belgrade-Pristina relations, and still does in reduced form. Kosovo was a UN protectorate for 9 years before the West decided Serbia couldn't be trusted to guarantee Albanian rights again. And only then was Kosovo greenlit to declare independence. Crimea was occupied overnight and forced into a sham referendum that cemented Russian control. Comparing the two makes a mockery of what was, for Kosovo, an intricately monitored process by the EU and UN. In fact, Serbia has positioned itself since 2014 as facing the same situation as Russia, from opposing the autocephaly of Montenegro's church, echoing Ukraine's Tomos debate, disavowing NATO, the EU, and the US, to branding all of its critics as fascists, despite its own fascist past. On international law, the case isn't airtight, but no country ever is. States don't exist because they adhere to international law. They exist through agreement, war, or historically established borders of sovereignty. Remedial secession, while unevenly implemented, is the main one here. Ethnic cleansing, systemic repression, and no realistic prospect of democratic governance made Serbia unfit to govern Kosovo. Unlike Crimea, part of Ukraine's international recognized borders as an independent state, Kosovo was a province with distinct political powers and protected ethnic rights within Yugoslavia, a state whose political succession was itself up for debate since its disintegration led to war. In fact, by citing Crimea as his own reason for not recognizing Kosovo, Zelensky inadvertently validates Putin's own logic. Putin claimed that the persecution of ethnic Russians in Crimea made it legitimate to use the Kosovo precedent to occupy and claim it as its own. Unlike Crimea's annexation, rejected by the UN and basically every credible legal body, Kosovo's independence was never even ruled illegal. The ICJ said so itself in 2010. The declaration violated neither general international law nor existing UN resolutions. Creating new states in the late 20th or 21st century is a messy, difficult issue to navigate. But you don't need to support Kosovo's independence to see that Zelensky is shooting himself in the foot, undercutting the very arguments he's made for why Ukraine deserves support. Ukraine's reason for not recognizing Kosovo is that Ukraine takes a very hard line against the idea that international borders can be changed. This prospect of the sanctity of territorial integrity is Ukraine's number one priority because they see it as the ultimate shutdown to any Russian arguments that Russia could make about why its conquest of Ukraine is acceptable. From that point of view, it is understandable why Ukraine could draw a very hard line there. But as Una stated, that's not the logic that is used. There was a long, internationally monitored process on the creation of Kosovo. There were many, many instances of how Serbia could have turned things around and guaranteed the rights of the Kosovar people, and just not tried to do ethnic cleansing and genocide. But Serbia persisted, and in fact, periodically threatens to invade Kosovo again to finish the job. There is an international process here that's being observed. It's not just the army shows up and declares a new territory. They're two entirely different things. And really, at the end of the day, Russia doesn't care about any of these arguments anyway. Yes, in 2014, at the beginning of everything, before they were even talking about NATO or all these other justifications that they have come up with since then, their basic argument for why it was okay for them to take Crimea was saying, oh, the West invaded Serbia to artificially create Kosovo, and we're just doing the same thing here. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. But like that was made up. They didn't actually care. They just wanted it. And if it wasn't that argument, it would have been any other argument. So trying to get lost in the sauce of what specific argument Russia makes in any particular moment is a losing game, because by the time that you're done rebutting one thing that Russia has said, they've come up with 10 other things. To the point where even now, you don't even hear them make that argument anymore, hardly ever. It's these new things that were less heard back then. So you're not going to be catching Russia in this logical trap that said, oh, you didn't support this, so you have to support this. It doesn't work that way. Stop trying to make it work that way. There's one more response that I would like to read out from the first Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs and Diaspora of the Republic of Kosovo, Glak Konyufsha. I'm so sorry to the Albanian language. Just go with it, I guess, that tried to really thread the needle of still supporting Ukraine while being disappointed in this statement. So, from this Kosovar official, we take note with regret of President Zelensky's remarks in Belgrade reaffirming Ukraine's non-recognition of the Republic of Kosovo. Since the first days of Russia's full-scale aggression, Kosovo has stood unequivocally with Ukraine. We condemn the invasion, fully aligned with the CFSP, imposed sanctions against Russia and Belarus, provided humanitarian assistance and refuge for Ukrainian journalists, and contributed military assistance and training in support for Ukraine's defense. We did so despite Ukraine's non-recognition of our state, because solidarity with a people defending its freedom, sovereignty, and territorial integrity is a matter of principle. It is equally important to recall a clear distinction. While Kosovo has imposed sanctions against Russia, Serbia has not aligned with the EU sanctions imposed in response to Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The Republic of Kosovo is a sovereign and independent state, born from the struggle of its people for freedom and from their liberation in 1999 after years of systemic repression and the genocidal campaign of the Milosevic regime. What followed was not an act of annexation, occupation, or territorial conquest, but a comprehensive international process under United Nations administration and years of international mediated negotiations on Kosovo's final status. When those negotiations had exhausted every possibility for an agreed settlement, UN Special Envoy Marti Ahtisaari recommended independence as Kosovo's final status and presented a comprehensive framework for a new state, including some of the most extensive constitutional guarantees for non-majority communities in Europe. Kosovo declares independence on 17th of February 2008 as the culmination of this political and historical process, assumed its responsibilities as a democratic and multi-ethnic state, and entered a period of internationally supervised independence. In 2010, the International Court of Justice confirmed that Kosovo's declaration of independence did not violate international law, while international supervision formally concluded in 2012. Today, the Republic of Kosovo is recognized by the overwhelming majority of NATO and EU member states, and has built its statehood firmly on the principles of democracy, human rights, peace, and Euro-Atlantic integration. For precisely these reasons, Russia's attempt to invoke Kosovo as a precedent or justification for its invasion, occupation, or attempted annexation of Ukrainian territory are historically and legally false. No such parallel exists. Kosovo remains steadfast in support for Ukrainian sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. At the same time, we respectfully but firmly reject any framing of the Republic of Kosovo through the prism of Serbia's territorial integrity. We would welcome Ukraine's recognition of the Republic of Kosovo. Such a decision would strengthen the very principles of freedom, democracy, and international law that Ukraine itself is defending today. And that is a wonderful response. That is a masterwork of diplomatic communication. So hats off to Kosovo on that. It's possible to consider Ukraine's actions to be offensive or wrong, and still ultimately support the struggle of the Ukrainian people against genocide. Kosovo sees in its struggle back then what Ukraine struggles against now. And to end that all off, I have to say that it is still my firm belief that had Kyiv fallen, had the Ukrainian military not been able to defend Ukraine from the Russian invasion, and Russia was able to unleash further imperial aggression onto Europe, the first thing that would have happened was Serbia starting to make moves in Bosnia and Kosovo, because they almost did that already in our current timeline. And in that other timeline, where the European security infrastructure falls apart in the face of Russian attack because Ukraine couldn't hold the line, Kosovo was next. I do see these conflicts as linked, and I would like the Ukrainian government to recognize that as well. So that is all the news for this episode. That was a good news roundup going in. For next episode will be topic specific about the American right and its relationship with Ukraine, especially regarding these new changes that were reflected in this Loomer visit. So once again, if you'd like to support Ukraine Without Hype, to cover some of my medical expenses in addition to getting blown up expenses, you can contribute at patreon.com/Ukraine Without Hype and join our list of subscribers. Join our Discord server. We have in our Discord someone who's gone to the protest every single day and has been giving us updates on that as part of our benefits package, I suppose. So once again, patreon.com/Ukraine Without Hype to support our primary employer, english.nv.ua for the new voice of Ukraine, to get your source of daily news on everything that's happening in this country, and to support Ukrainian independent media, go to patreon.com/nvua. I just put out another video today, actually, on there. And thank you very much to our patrons, Randy McNerlin, the voices in my head are from Big Pharma, Kyle Smith, Damascus Medusa, Giorgio, David Shepard, Ivana Kukratskaya, Mike, Kevin Epperton, Michael Drucker, PLM, Arminius, T. Bart, Barbara, Devi, Anonymous, Michael Wickman, Jenny Louise, Marguerite, Dmitry Litvin, Dennis Napalm, Vivek, James Burke, Jared Bradley, Allison Chainsaw, Big Meg, Elizabeth Hughes, Nick Nazin, Andy S., John Gates, Nicole Ford, Sanjay, Grace Krause, Laura De Leon, Had to Laugh, Jacob Holm, Chris Bennington, Levy Grove, James Wise, Alex Grove, Emily Bavona, the Beyond Barbarossa podcast, Anonymous, Subtle Knife, RDK, Tanya, Laurie Halila, Christopher Yee, Lemonican, Demetrio, Ursula Zolenkoff, Noah Brown, Glow and Wind, Can Dystopian Fiction Please Remain Fiction, Marcus Nashkis, Andrew Glenn, Zay Perry, William, Abel Lenz, Denna Jones, Joseph Verlone, I think I went too far, Yellow Duck, Anonymous, Bucktron 2021, Florian, Matthew Rowe, Bill, Big Chinchilla Lobby, and Hero. Thank you all very much for your support. It's what makes this all possible. And until next time, Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава!